Testing, testing, testing. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we're joined tonight, or late this afternoon, by some people who are participating via live stream as well. So to those of you who are tuning in, we welcome you as well. And I just want to express gratitude to everybody who's joining for taking the time to both be here and to help us as university welcome really an esteemed colleague and member of the Society of Jesus who has come admittedly indirectly through New York and Seattle from Rome to be with us. And I would say, too, as part of that, there's a little story in that the background around this invitation was really originated in the back in the late summer and fall of 2018 when the nation was made aware of the findings of the Pennsylvania grand jury investigation, which is actually the sixth investigation, and that begat revelations related to Cardinal McCarrick and Cardinal Wuerl. And we as a university found ourselves really trying to grapple, aware as we had been and become over the years of some of the issues related to sex abuse in the church and the crisis that the community of church had been working to confront for a long time, how we ought to consider ourselves as a Catholic community and a Jesuit work in light of these sort of waves of continuous discovery and revelation of just how broadly this crisis had impacted communities around the country and indeed around the world. And I think that one of the issues that Professor Shevland and I talked about at that time was just sort of baseline awareness of these issues, but also over time in collaboration with colleagues in the department and my colleague Dr. Wheatley and some of the work that has been going on within our campus community, a recognition that this crisis that gripped the Catholic Church and that has had so many consequences and implications is really a worldwide crisis. It certainly has been and has been experienced in very specific terms regionally and locally, but there's a reality that abuse of role and power and issues related to this as structural realities within the church, if you think of it as a worldwide organization and the specific expressions of it, is something that that individuals who have been studying and bearing witness to this realize has expressed itself all around the globe. And the idea of inviting Hans Zollner to be part of this process of discovery and to really understand some of the work that he's been doing for a number of years was something that we thought about rather early on. But the invitation itself, which was extended at that time, became hugely problematic with the pandemic. And we really wanted, if at all possible, to actually have Father Zollner here, present with us. And so I think respectively we were patient. And I'm very grateful to you, Hans, for your willingness to travel to be with us. So thank you. Father Zollner is a German Jesuit priest. He is regarded as one of the leading ecclesiastical experts in the field of safeguarding from sexual abuse, and he is a theologian as well a psychologist. And today, after having served a number of different roles at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, including serving as head of the then referenced Center for Child Protection, he today heads up the Institute of Anthropology, interdisciplinary studies on human dignity and care, and is considered to be as well an individual who has been tireless in working to develop and to propagate opportunities for individuals in various ministries of the church to learn more about and to have opportunities to develop their own competencies around safeguarding of children and adults in various contexts. He was born in Regensburg, Germany, and completed his doctorate in theology at the University of Innsbruck, and obtained a licentiate in psychology at the Pontifical Gregorian University. He has been a member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors since its creation. And in 2017, Pope Francis appointed him as a consultor to the Congregation for the Clergy. Father Zollner views safeguarding of minors as one of the main tasks that the Catholic Church needs to have at the heart of its ministries. He has visited workshops, delivered addresses, and made presentations at Episcopal conferences in countries all around the world, addressing the need for developing awareness and establishing safeguarding measures. So this afternoon, we are so grateful to have him joining our community today to share his thoughts and his perspectives. And as part of his own preparation for his time here, as is to be expected, he asked a lot of questions about our own specific context and history as well. So very grateful for your willingness to be with us and to engage in these discussions. I'd like to ask if all of you would please join me in warmly welcoming Father Hans Zollner.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. And it's really a privilege to be here after almost 4 years of preparation. I was very glad when we landed around noon that the weather was fine, even if it is a little bit windy here. Anyway, it reminds me of my home, the center of Bavaria, with lots of fields of corn and other crop and lots of wood and water. So I feel very much welcomed here, and thank you for the hospitality also at the Jesuit community. I have studied a little bit about the history of abuse in this province of the Society of Jesus and related to this university. And I've learned a lot about it also last weekend when 3 of your colleagues here were at Fordham University in New York. Michelle, Megan, and Kevin, who are here also, and their project that was part of a bigger grant by 9 Jesuit universities in the country, researching different aspects of abuse within the church and Jesuit institutions. What I would like to do is to share with you over the next 45 minutes or so some of my observations and experiences, and then I hope that we can also enter into a conversation. So this flows out not only of the situation that we have in the United States, but from what I perceive, I listen to, I observe in different parts of the world. And at the Gregorian University in Rome, we have students from 150 countries or so, and I've personally worked also in psychotherapy with people from different parts of the world, different languages, different cultures. So this is also my proposal to you to think of a very uncomfortable area of our life, human life, Christian life, Catholic life, church life, and in terms of responsibility that all of us have. And this is maybe my most important point, which I would like to make at the beginning. All of us can make something so that any institution, a university like Gonzaga, a school, a parish, a diocese, a religious province, can be a safer place for all of us. Because only then we do what is our deepest vocation, our Christian vocation, our call to follow Christ, who wanted that all people, and especially the most vulnerable ones, can come close to Jesus. And all of us can do something. Open eyes, open ears, open mouth. Talk about this, even if it is difficult. Continue to bring it up, even if there are resistances, and engaging conversation. All of us can do a little bit in this. Nobody can do all. So these are my points for this afternoon. On the spot, the clericalist attitude, perceptions of survivors, paradoxes, and some ideas about what could be a way forward in terms of structural consequences and theological and pastoral principles, plus spiritual lessons. So the situation in regard to the Catholic Church, that is the one institution in the world that has attracted most attention, certainly in media, but also in the academic field. No other institution and no other population have been researched as much as the Catholic Church and Catholic clergy. And as the President has already said, we have to deal with a crisis, or better, a double crisis. The shock about the abuse committed by clergy and religious, and sometimes the even bigger shock about the collaboration of church hierarchy, bishops and provincials, in not addressing properly and according to the church's own norms allegations of abuse, the cover-up, the negligence, and the more or less strong passive, at least passive resistance in dealing with all what was known and could have been addressed. Of late, I'm just referring to the most recent developments. Finally, also in Portugal and Spain, there is some movement in terms of the availability and the willingness of the bishops, the respective bishops' conferences, to do an investigation, to commission an independent investigation into the cases of abuse in the past. You see that Italy is missing there. You may not believe it, but even in Eastern and Southern Europe, until now, we don't have had independent inquiries into the scale of abuse that has been committed. This has very much to do with the fact that the Church, the Catholic Church, does not exist outside a certain society, a certain culture. And in all these countries, neither in the southern nor in the Central Eastern European countries, there has been a willingness until very recently to even allow for discussion and mention of clerical sexual abuse. The Munich report, the recent Munich report, was published in January, and that was particularly interesting for the public because one of the former archbishops is Pope Emeritus Benedict, and you may have followed the news, but the echo in regard to what was revealed in terms of abuse and cover-up over the last 75 years in the Archdiocese of Munich had a really big impact on the Catholic Church in Germany and beyond. The French report, commissioned by the Bishops' Conference, was published in October, and for the first time talked not only about the numbers, the known numbers of allegations and convictions and victims, survivors of abuse, but mentioned also what in sociology would be called a projection, an esteem of numbers of victims who we could possibly assume that they have gone through abuse, but cannot be, and will never be verified, because a good number of them will never speak out. Over the last 4 or 5 years, since the Me Too movement that started here in this country in October 2017, there is an increased focus on abuse of adults that was then sort of complemented by the McCarrick report and the focus on abuse of adult seminarians. And then the Pope Francis, in one of his famous flying press conferences, mentioned, I believe it was early 2019, the question of abuse of consecrated women by priests in some parts of the world. And the impression is, wave after wave of news, and the thought and the observation is, does anything change? Or is it still going on in the same way? How can it happen over and over again? Do they get it? And by they, the general public and Catholics all around the globe ask the question, particularly in reference to bishops, cardinals, and the Pope himself. And this shows that there is a change, and this change is very, very real. Until 4 or 5 years ago, you would somehow criticize, you would even attack a bishop who mishandled a case or cases in his diocese or a provincial. But since 4 or 5 years, there has come about a general mistrust in hierarchy in the Catholic Church. So this is quite pervasive, and this is quite present in many parts of the world. At the same time, the Catholic Church is the biggest and the oldest and probably the most complicated institution on the globe. So you have 1.3 billion Catholics in 24 churches, of which the Roman Catholic Church of the Latin Rite is only one. You have 23 other churches. The biggest, for example, the Greek Catholic Church, or other churches like the Syro-Malabar Church, with their own structures, their own synods, their own bishops' conferences, their own procedures for appointment of bishops. You have 5,300 bishops in 2,900 dioceses. You have an unknown number of religious congregations. And then you have the Holy See, the Vatican, that says, pretends, does universal oversight over all this with a very limited number of staff. If you imagine the Holy See section for the Middle East, for example, would have 2 or 3 persons sitting there, not like the State Department in this country with probably 3,000 or 5,000 people. So there is something that does not correspond to the task and the self-understanding. And I think one of the key questions for the future of the functioning of the Church will be, how does that come together and how much decentralization can take place? One of the main topics that have come up in regard to causes of abuse is the clericalist attitude. And when I have been in contact with clergy, and when you read statements, you very often come across the following words. The world simply does not understand us. I represent Christ and his church. The media attacks are a sure sign that we are following the crucified. I can take whatever I wish, I have renounced to so much. My vocation is to serve. Now, much of this, what I'm quoting, can also be understood in a good way, in a positive way. But if you use it as self-defense or putting yourself on a pedestal and making yourself immune against criticism, it becomes what we call clericalism. I don't need anybody tell me what I should do. I do not need to justify myself. I'm accountable to God alone. This has been very much the attitude of the Church as an organization in many countries, at least, where the Church defended itself, protected itself, and especially, and in a particular way, clergy, not so much lay people. And nobody shall criticize me, because I am a priest, and therefore you know less, and you have less insight, and you have certainly less understanding of what is really important. So much of this has been in the background of what is called with this buzzword clericalism, and which has contributed to a culture of silence and a culture of inaction when it came to abuse, because, as we have seen over and over again, and almost all the reports that I've quoted repeat that and show it over and over again, very often almost with the same terms. There is something that has, over decades, probably centuries, grown inside Catholic clergy and Catholic hierarchy that was meant to protect the own class or caste and made it impermeable to criticism, to something what we would call today auditing, and that didn't help in any way to keep oneself available for growth, for learning, and for ongoing formation. In contrast, perceptions of survivors, also what I share here, has grown out of working and listening to survivors over many years now, survivors from different parts of the world, different context of the abuse that has happened, different ages when the abuse had happened, different cultures in which these people live and have been victims of abuse. Never ever has anybody listened to me, to my story, to my hurt. This is probably the single most often line to which I have listened. And this is particularly impressive and devastating when we talk about those who should have listened. Pastors, we call them pastors. Pastors of a diocese, pastors of a parish, pastors of a province. Pastor, the shepherd, who according to the gospel is meant to heal the wounded ones, to reach out to the lost ones, to call on those who don't find shelter. So there is a contrast here which is very difficult to understand. How could people who have been ordained for the best of their fellow human beings, who were meant to heal and sent out to preach the gospel, the good news, became those who closed their eyes and their ears to people who were looking for help, support, or at least some presence. But very often there was no way for victims of abuse of getting that kind of assistance and closeness. We have also to add that very often victims of abuse share that nobody was listening to them, not even their parents, not even their friends, sometimes not even their partners. I'm livid that they push away their responsibility. So this is the impression that many victims have, that especially when it comes to trying to find out who was responsible for what, that there is always a pointing to the other person. And it is almost impossible to find out who was responsible for what. Now, I have to add here a caveat, because in the the culture that you have in your country here, with much litigation going on, and the special, let me say, attitude also from the side of lawyers, it is seemingly it is very difficult to find a way so that documentation can be handed over or can be made accessible because of all the legal implications that that has. This is not the case in all countries, or it is especially strong in countries of common law. But still, it is a huge question how we could do better in owning our responsibility. I don't know to whom I can turn for support. If only I had not been so powerless. I had blind trust in Father X. I couldn't imagine that he could do anything evil. We were talking about that also over lunch with some colleagues. On one hand, the complete trust in clergy and the impossibility to think and even allow the thought that a priest could do something evil, which for many victims has been proven so harmful, because then they blame themselves. But then also in regard to parents who could have seen something and could have intervened. But again, in certain cultures, it was impossible to question Father, because Father was above everything. Let alone criticize him, let alone accusing him. I've struggled long enough, I give up. There is a certain number of survivors of abuse inside the church outside that has tried to commit suicide, and some committed suicide. I feel so dirty and guilty, so this is the psychological paradox that the person who has been abused sometimes takes all the blame, and he or she feels dirty and guilty, and not the perpetrator. If only they had the courage to confess their crimes and to do justice to us. Now again, as with the clerical voices, the voices of victims are, as I said, quite substantiated in my experience, but I have also to add that there is not one perpetrator and there is not one single victim that has the same expectations and the same experience as the other. So one would also always need to listen to and to attend to what one person wants, needs, and expresses. Now, there are some things that I've discovered over the years that I would call paradoxes. And that shows that our life is not black and white. Our life has always shades of gray, and it has always ambiguity in our own lives, in the life of an institution, and that's why I would say that in the church and the Society of Jesus, and in all other religious congregations and dioceses, we have at the same time victims and perpetrators in the same congregation, in the same liturgy, in the same community, in the same diocese. Victims and perpetrators. It's not black and white. You have those who prosecute the crimes and those who cover up. In the same university, in the same environment, in the same context. You have those who I would call the safeguarders, who work for safeguarding, and those who downplay and deny the importance of that. In the same space. It's not easy to realize that, because we would like, for our own psychological health and for our own well-being, probably we would like to be only on the good side, and the others are the bad ones. I think there is a big temptation in this. And the temptation has played out in the history of the church quite forcefully in the Gnostic movements, pushing aside those we don't want in our midst. That doesn't work, and that is not the reality of human beings, certainly not of Christians, even if it costs us to allow for acknowledging that we are not perfect. And we have been speaking about that also at the Fordham conference, about the images that the Society of Jesus portrays and has received as better than others, and we should have done exceptionally well in dealing with cases and allegations. We were not. Acknowledging that takes away also some portions of self-esteem and brings us closer to reality. Then we say in the church, we are one church. We profess that in the profession of faith every Sunday. We believe in the one church. Now, how does that correspond to the very little passing on of experience and expertise from one local church to the other, from one religious congregation to the other, from one province to the other? Why do we have to repeat over and over again the same mistakes? Why did the US church not learn from the Canadian, and the Australian not from the American, and the Australian and the Irish not from the Australian, and the Germans not from the Irish, and the Italians not from the Germans, nor the Polish? So why is that seemingly the same process repeat over and over again? Denial, fighting media, pushing away responsibility. It is hard to understand why we don't do better as a church as a whole. Then I mentioned the clericalism as a phenomenon among clergy. When I was in Melbourne for a workshop for the school directors of Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Melbourne, and they were all women, lay women. And I had my run through the clerical attitudes. They stopped me and said, "Stop here, please, because what you describe, we have also in our midst. We also strive for privilege. We also have our battles about our seemingly be perfect, and we also think sometimes ourselves better than others and present ourselves as others." And another aspect of this is that the clericalism that we don't want has also been built and reinforced by non-clergy, by how little awareness and willingness there was to take on clergy on obvious issues. Then the image of the church is very broadly speaking is of a pyramid and a strict monolithic block, top-down governance. This is not the reality in the Catholic Church. There are some things that go top-down, but very few. Most of all, church life effectively is governed by very diverse interventions and by power that is not channeled and is quite diffuse and contested. How would you explain cardinals criticizing or archbishops criticizing the Pope very fiercely in public? How would you explain that? Could you do the same at Gonzaga University, attacking your boss all the time? It wouldn't be possible. The Catholic Church, it's obviously allowed. Would you think that a bishop implements one-to-one what the Pope says? You can't. You can see in your part of the country that this is not the case. What the Pope Francis, in this case, wants us to do in regard to migrants, in regard to ecology, and so forth. Do you see that the bishops follow them one by one and one after the other? To the contrary. So, when it comes to abuse and dealing with allegations, it is at least, let me say, problematic that there is no clear line of command, and that you don't know who takes what decision at what level and what stage. Because if that were the case, you could go back and find out who did wrong. Very often, in cases of abuse, it's impossible to find out who took what decision at what stage and who knew about what, when. Actually, there is the Dutch report from the Netherlands, the Deetman report, that spoke about the lack of structure, accountability, and clear rules as one of the reasons for abuse and cover-up. The contrary to what you would expect and what the general image about the church is as a very strict and very authoritarian institution. No, it is not. Effectively, it is not in many areas. And this has given many opportunities for the continuation of abuse and its cover-up. And then there's another tendency, just ticking off obligations. Years ago, I was researching what American universities do, Catholic universities do in regard to safeguarding. I didn't come to Spokane on the website. I had other Catholic universities in the country, and I was so impressed about the number of institutions and offices you have, and the guidelines and the formation and so on. And I mean, it is impressive. It's pages and pages that you can download. So at a certain point, I got really worried, because my impression was that it is so much of material, and it is so much of words, and it is so perfect that by just putting that on the web page and by just introducing it, you think you have done what needs to be done so that there is no possibility for further abuse. And I believe this is what I would call the ticking off of obligation. We have done what we are required to do by the state, by the public, by media, by our own staff, and so forth, forgetting that this is important, yes, to have norms, to have guidelines, to have formation. But what is equally important is that you keep yourself awake, and that you look around even in spaces where you think everything is okay. Because unfortunately, we won't be able to do away with abuse once and for all. with all our safeguarding measures, we won't eradicate abuse once and for all. It's impossible, because human nature doesn't allow for that. Because we continue to do evil things, even if we have the gospel, even if we have the law, even if we have our own conscience. We act against that. So there needs also to be the willingness to continue living with a very uncomfortable area of our life, which is tangible, like in probably not many other areas, in the area of sexual abuse. So what could be a way forward? My hunch is that the trauma, or better, the experience of trauma that is connected with any kind of abuse, and especially sexual abuse committed at an early age, the experience of that trauma sets off a process of splitting. In psychology, we call that process the separation of a part of the experience that is too painful to bear and to keep in conscience. So, splitting off means you can go on with your own life, not thinking continuously and not being impacted strongly by the experience of the abuse. If that experience was present all the time, you couldn't go on living, because you would always be under the impression of fear, of anger, of shame, of guilt, whatever you have. So the splitting off of that part of experience is the attempt of our psyche, of our mental capacities, to keep on going and to live the life that is possible. But there is a high cost to that. You split off something, some energy, some part of your life's possibilities. You split that off. And my hunch is that with the awareness about the amount of abuse that has happened and the sheer number of survivors in our midst, survivors of abuse that has happened 10 years, 20, 50 years back, which comes to the surface now because we are capacitated to talk about it. That was not the case 20 years ago, 40 years ago. We talk about it today. Now, by surfacing that reality, the dissociated part of the reality of that trauma comes to light and comes to the experiential level. And this is, in my interpretation, in my reading of the situation, this is part of many of the aspects of the crises that we have spoken about. And the result is that the splitting, the disruption of bridges, the, let me say, separation of areas of life becomes visible. And I think that healing, in that sense, can only take place once this reality is acknowledged. First, the reality of the trauma, of the wounds, of the pain of victims and survivors of abuse. As long as this is outside our consciousness, our feeling, our willingness to walk with survivors, as long as this is outside, the splitting will continue and will have very harmful effects. So what I propose is that the split apart pieces need to come together. We need norms, we need guidelines, we need a law, and the law has changed within the church over the last 12 years continuously. Today was announced another change in church law in regard to cases of abuse. So this is in continuous evolution. But law alone will not solve the problem, will not deter perpetrators to abuse, and will not heal the wounds. And most of all, it will not help us as a community to stand up to this reality. That is done only when and insofar as we change our attitudes. And the attitude would need to be one of willingness to engage with it and not pushing it away and not pushing it to others, neither to the clergy nor to the bishops nor to the laity. This is something we need to face together in different capacities with different responsibilities. Law and spirituality and theology, we have spoken over lunch also about the necessity that theology engages more in this. Why over 40 years since the onset of the public interest in this reality of abuse, why there has been so little publication? I don't deny that there have been single individual theologians, male and female, priests and non-priests, who have written on this, who have reflected, but I don't see a movement within theology to take this on seriously and consistently. Then justice and mercy. For me, another area where we need to do a lot. Again here, black and white is easily applied. The question, the burning question is, how can perpetrators be forgiven? Is there some redemption for perpetrators? We would, in a first reaction, we would say no. They should burn in hell, right? But this is not exactly what Jesus proposed. But how does that relate to the justice that is necessary as the entry door to heaven? I haven't found much reflection on that in relation to, for example, the question of justice and mercy to victims and to perpetrators. Then, until 5 years back, there was a strong focus on the care for children, whereas over the last years we have grown in the awareness that adult persons at risk also need protection and safeguarding. I avoid, at least writing, the term vulnerable person because it is offensive for some, and for me it is not clear what is meant by the term, and that's why I have for years avoided the term. It's now in church law, the term is in church law now, but it is so broad that all of us would be vulnerable persons, and that doesn't help much when it comes to protecting people in special situations of risk or in special context of risk. Clergy and laity, as I said, for me it was a very strong experience maybe 5 years ago when I was at a meeting here in the States, and it was the starting point of the discussion on McCarrick and so forth, and very powerful and very influential laity said, okay, now we will move on. We will take over the church. Bishops are incapable, so let us do the job. I don't think this is going to work. And certainly it's not the model of the church as we have it. So there must be some type of collaboration, of common willingness. I hear very often, especially in this country, that laity doesn't find themselves listened to by hierarchy, by the bishops. I acknowledge that, sure. Question is are there ways, or which ways are there, so that there is more interaction, there is more, at least, possibility to meet. Then another term or another understanding of laity in regard to safeguarding proper. There is a tendency that you create an office and you appoint a person and you train an expert in safeguarding, and then you tick it off again. And you are redeemed. You don't need to engage anymore. I mean, wherever I go, that people say, so here comes the expert in safeguarding. And then people listen, and then they have done their bit. No, please. That's not the purpose. That's not the sense. Yes, we need experts, we need people who are specifically trained, and in our institute we train safeguarding personnel for the church worldwide, but they are meant to create networks of collaboration in different ways and with people of different capacities and competences. Then in almost no country in the world you have collaboration and common direction between dioceses and religious congregations. Very often there are, for whatever reason, there is a great diversity. So I believe that we can change that only, the situation and the challenge. We can only live up to the challenges if we come together. One of the key features that I perceive in the church at the moment is this division. I mean, if I may allow myself this comment, the polarization in the Catholic Church in the US is so strong, and for me is so disturbing, that I ask myself, where are there possibilities to dialogue? And I believe that this new asceticism that would come in place of the old ascetical exercises that have no sense in today's world would mean to engage in building bridges and investing in finding the common ground. And that doesn't seem to be easy, and that doesn't seem to be attractive. But I don't see a way out of this if we don't come together in the different areas that I have explained. Now, in the theological and pastoral world, the question has arisen, when is this going to be over so that we can go back to our real ministries? You can hear that over and over again. Is it not enough? Now we have talked enough about that. Why do you need to poke over and over again? This shows a great uncomfortableness, besides valid arguments, but in the end it is expressed very often by people who don't want to touch this in any way. I believe that this is our real ministry, and that is what God is calling us today, especially in care for victims. I personally am convinced that in all what is connected to abuse and its cover-up, you can find all the major questions that the church needs to face, like in a nutshell. It's not the only area where you see this, but it is, like in a nutshell, the question of how do we relate to the world? What is sacredness? What is the role of clergy? How do we understand redemption? It's all there. We forgot that victims are part of our flock too. And I believe that there could be, I see in some parts of the world, I see signs that there are other types of vocations growing in response to the needs of the church today. I ask, for example, sometimes I ask religious sisters who run schools and hospitals and so on, why don't you open up a listening center in the city? A very low threshold, open to anybody. People who want to share something just need to be listened to. People who have been harmed and maybe even traumatized. Give up the schools and run you will see that this is so much needed today. Co-responsibility and not bystanders. We, in a church that has understandably and necessarily come to a certain level of professionalization, we also need to realize that whatever our specific role is, we also have a co-responsibility for what we do as an institution, and we cannot only look on. Why? Because dignity is relational. It is not only a property. It is something that comes out of our attitude, how we encounter people. This is the relational piece. It's not something that is only tagged on us. And that is what we need to communicate by what we say and by what we do. Finally, spiritual lessons. How do we deal with our own resistances, our own uncomfortableness, and the questions around sexuality, faith, church leadership, as well as with safeguarding fatigue? Safeguarding fatigue meaning you do a lot in safeguarding, you think you have done everything, and still it's not enough. And still new cases that are publicized destroy whatever you have tried to rebuild in terms of trust and so forth. The question, where is the space for survivors in our midst? Space in which survivors can express themselves as they wish and not as we expect them to do. Then what is at the center of our attention? Our institutions, our reputation, or the victims, the vulnerable ones, the other, and the other with capital, God. I very often have the impression that in the defense of the institutions, we forget for what the institutions are meant to be. And what do dignity and care mean to us and for in our ministries? So, just let me finish with something maybe slightly more hopeful. What we do at the Institute of Anthropology, Interdisciplinary Studies of Human Dignity and Care, we train people for a better present and a better future. We offer an e-learning training and qualification, especially for pastoral professions, in different languages. We organize research and conferences, and we offer residential programs of a one-semester diploma, certificate course, and a master's course of 2 years in safeguarding plus doctorates. This is our contribution so that people who are highly committed become more competent to do whatever can be done so that abuse is prevented. I want to finish with what I have started. thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for your presence here. Thank you for your willingness to engage in this here now and when you walk out of this hall, because all of us can do something, and when we do what each one here can do, we will make a difference. Thank you.
Hans has requested opportunities if people have questions for him that might have been brought forward by the presentation, questions about the work of IADC, the programs that he mentioned through the talk and at the end. If you would like to ask a question or make a point, we just simply ask that you use the microphone so that the people who are listening to this online live stream have a chance to hear what you wish to say, as well as Father Zollner's response. So if there are any questions, please feel free to come forward to a microphone and ask them.
Thank you for your presentation, Father. I have really two questions. One is, you indicated in your presentation that you don't perceive that, or you do perceive that abuse is probably always going to be with us. So in relation to cleric abuse, the first question I have is, are you aware of any studies that indicate or research that indicate that there's a higher incidence of abuse by clerics? And then the second question I would have is, have the safeguards that have been implemented over the last 15 years or so have any impact, positive impact, on the incidence of abuse as we know it has occurred over the past? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, important questions. To the first one, I would like to refer to what I mentioned at the beginning, very beginning, when I said the Catholic Church and its clergy has been on the spot for media and in academia. And to put it briefly, we can't say, scientifically speaking, that there is a higher incidence of abuse by clergy than in other professions, simply for the fact that we don't have a comparison that is scientifically valid, at least in regard to the global situation. No other type of population has been researched as thoroughly as Catholic clergy, understandably, because of the higher expectations and the bigger scandal, but teachers, medical doctors, policemen, military, kindergarten educators, whatever, have not been researched like that. We don't even have comparison to Protestant or Orthodox clergy, because there is no real substantial research into that. I have seen maybe 3 years ago the first study that I had come across on Protestant pastors in this country and the incidence of sexual abuse committed against minors. And that was in 3 denominations. One was Southern Baptist, one was Episcopalian, and another mainstream church. Can't remember now. And the result was, now this was only this country, and this was only 3 denominations. The result was the numbers of the proportion, the incidence, so many abuse with so much clergy, was more or less the same as with the Catholic clergy. Maybe slightly less, but not significantly. What was different was where the abuse happened. In the Catholic clergy, it was in the parish buildings, whereas the abuse committed by Protestant pastors was at home. The final sentence of that article says, these are 3 churches out of 200,000 churches that you have in this country. In this country. So scientifically, it is very difficult to find a comparison. Your second question, the effectiveness of safeguarding measures. Now, since the introduction of the Dallas Charter in 2002, the number of allegations referring to the years from 2002 onwards has decreased and remains at a very low level over the last years. Not, attention, not referring to before 2002, but from 2002, Dallas Charter, onwards, the number of allegations referring to this period, the last 20 years, remains consistently low. And my last conference at Fordham, before this one, was with Karen Terry and Maggie Smith, the 2 researchers, main researchers for the John Jay report. And they were asked, but can we expect that this will carry on, knowing that many victims of abuse start talking about it 20, 30, 40 years later? They said, from statistics, from their point of view, there is no way that it could go up as it was before. So, in short, safeguarding measures are effective. And you can see that in any place in the world where you have had an introduction of safeguarding measures like necessity for guidelines, training, and a certain public that also in the church that is aware that this is an issue. What we don't know scientifically is what is effective in safeguarding. I can tell you there are, in this field, there are 1,000 questions that I would like to research, because the most obvious things are not clear to us. We don't know what is effective in safeguarding. We simply don't know what is more effective than others. And that is to say, we need to do something. Simply, it's like watering the flowers. You water everything and it grows, but could you water more precisely? And so this would help us much. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. The United States Department of Justice estimates that about 91% of perpetrators of acts of sexual violence in the United States are men. And given that statistic, I'm wondering what you think. To what extent would the introduction of women into the Catholic priesthood, to what degree might that introduction lessen the likelihood of acts of sexual abuse against minors?
Very simple. It would lessen it a lot, as far as we know. It would not take away. the possibility of abuse committed by men and by women. It is true that we don't have knowledge about much abuse committed by women. I was just reading this on the travel. This is the good thing about travel, you can always read. So I was reading a very interesting book, which is not very recent, but on sexual violence committed by men. And yes, there are, in all probability, there are specific weaknesses in the psychosexual development of human beings who are called men, as compared to women, that make for a much higher incidence in what is called the paraphilias. So what used to be called the major perversions in psychiatry once upon a time. It's simple math. If you had women, it would be much less. But there is a caveat there. We have very little knowledge about sexual abuse committed by women. There is almost no literature until 2 or 3 years back. And it is growing. The awareness that women can be perpetrator and maybe perhaps more frequently perpetrator than we have thought until now. So with all what could be the positive effect of having women much more present in the church, not only if they were priests but also in other positions, it's not that women are exempt of that. Because why did many male or female victims of abuse committed by women not talk about it? Because it seems to be an even bigger taboo. And perhaps because it is less likely to be detected and to be experienced as such. And by the way, there is, from my perspective, there is quite some looming question about sexual abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse committed by religious women in religious communities. This is, in terms of numbers, I believe this is not negligible.
I had to write this down so I could remember it. Since this is a global scandal and as more churches become more under investigation for this abuse, do you believe personally or notice a difference in the way other priests have had to change the way they approach being a priest because of the certain mistrust?
This is very obvious. I believe, from what I have seen in 70 countries on all continents, that the self-perception and the awareness how priests are perceived from others inside the church, outside the church, has changed dramatically over the last at least 20 years. And this is another aspect that we would need to look into. In England, there was a dissertation done by a priest at a secular university on the self-perception of priests who have not committed abuse. And the term he used for his dissertation was the non-offensive priest. Now, imagine you define yourself as the non-offensive one. It includes already the suspicion that you could turn into an offender. This could lead to, for example, to two ways of responding to that. One is becoming so shaken in one's own self-esteem and in one's own self-determination that one says, I cannot be or I cannot become a priest. I hear many seminarians in seminaries around the globe who say, I don't want to become an offender, so can I continue in seminary training? As if it was an automatism to, finally you become an offender. The other reaction is equally present, that is the siege mentality reinforced. They attack us, as I tried to quote before, no? They attack us, the outsiders, they want to harm us, they want to demean us, and so forth and so forth. And therefore, keep them out and don't talk about it, and so. This is the other side. I see that the whole question has had a huge impact on the self-perception of priests and bishops. What I don't see is the acknowledgement of that much. It's not much talked about. And again, then it is split off. This is part of the experience. If you walk on the streets of Dublin or Melbourne with this one, you will be insulted and sometimes spit on. And you live under that. This is so we need to cope with that, and we need also to find a way of expressing that, which is part of the bigger picture that I tried to paint before. So where are we in this world, and how do we relate to this world?
Father, there seems to be the perception or opinion that if celibacy was not part of the requirement for the Catholic priesthood in particular, that perhaps we would not have this type of problem, at least as extensively as we have had. Now, you indicated, I think, that there's not much, if any, information available, for example, on the Orthodox Church and ministers and priests in reference to abuse. Is there any information in the Eastern Rite Church concerning the married priest and sexual abuse issues?
No, there is no real numbers for that. What I can say in extension to this response is that all reports, all scientific, government commissioned, church commissioned, whatever you have, the French report, the German report, the Australian Royal Commission report, all of them state textually that celibacy is not the cause for abusive behavior. Otherwise, everybody celibate would become an abuser, and that would not only concern those who vow celibacy, but the 30% of a population, or maybe even more, like in New York, who live without a partner. However, there is certainly some concern in regard to how celibacy is explained, is trained during seminary formation, and is then lived out in the priestly life. And there is one important statistical fact which has been brought out by a meta-study comparing all the numbers that we have until 2018 from the different reports. And this is very interesting. The average age of a first-time offending priest was of 39 years. I repeat, the average age of a first-time offending priest was of 39 years. The age of a first-time conviction of a sports trainer, of a school teacher, or of a family father offender was 24 years. Now, what does that show? One, celibacy is not the cause, because a priest has lived for about 20 years, if you include the seminary training, a celibate life before he becomes an offender. Secondly, this seminary life and priestly life deters potential offenders at least for 15 more years than a non-clergy. What it shows, thirdly, is that at mid-life, at the age of 40, when physical changes, psychological changes set in, when loneliness creeps in, when very often spirituality falls flat, when workload is immense, when good relationships, good friendships are not lived out, then abusive behavior of any kind, and also of sexual type, psychological, whatever, can become a means for the person to try to fill the void, the loneliness, which corresponds also to the fact that I would also like to mention, 90% of abuse committed by clergy is not pedophilia, is not of pedophilic nature. Pedophilia being defined in psychiatric terms as the abuse of prepubescent children up to the age of 10, 11, 12. 90% is of adolescents. And this shows, and this ephebophilia, this is called ephebophilia, not pedophilia. Ephebophilia, so sexual interaction with minors from the onset of puberty to the age of 18. This is 90% of the abuse victims of Catholic clergy, which is not defined as a psychiatric disease. These are not sick people, at least not in regard to the typology of and the diagnosis of this abusive behavior. What it shows is that there are other dynamics that bring about abusive behavior. And this has much to do also with questions of lifestyle, with questions of relationship to women, with what do we expect priests to do and to be. So that poses major questions about the celibate lifestyle as such. Not celibacy as such creates abuse, but yes, if it is lived out in a harmful way.
I'm very curious to hear a definition maybe of safeguarding. And I'll start by saying that I'm taking from this many different activities across the world inside the church that are meant for the protection of children, a broad definition. In this country, thanks to the Dallas Charter, one of the structures that was created to aid in the way that this church dealt with a crisis was the creation of diocesan lay review boards. There are several members of the lay review board from this diocese present. I'm one of them. It's been one of the most interesting and engaging experiences that I've had, and I've been on that committee since its inception in this diocese almost 20 years ago. I'm curious, because you have such a global perspective, whether or not that particular modality is used other places in the world as a part of safeguarding, if your research would include it in safeguarding, and if not, what other structures exist where lay people's involvement becomes important in that work?
Yeah, thank you first and foremost for your work in this review board and for so many years. Yes, there are similar structures in countries like Australia, England, Scotland, Ireland. You would have that. I would think not in many more. One, because I believe the voice of laity in this country is listened to and is heard more than in other parts of the world. Secondly, because in this country you have very qualified and competent lay people in this area who also are willing to speak out. And this is not the case in many parts of the world for different reasons. There are other models. I mean, in my country, in Germany, you would have laity who are responsible at the diocesan level for implementation of safeguarding measures. In institutions, you would have occasionally something similar like a review board. But all in all, I would think the great majority of countries don't have that. I believe that this has a great merit and would also need to be researched in the sense of, so what are the positive learnings that you can have from that? But it depends also, as I said, it depends very much on the cultural context. And the cultural context in this country is different to other countries. Look to the south. Could you imagine the same in Mexico? I don't think so. Which makes it difficult. Again, what do we transfer and how do we transfer learning experiences to other parts of the world? Knowing that something may not translate immediately in one-to-one in other countries and contexts, because there is a different sensitivity, there is a different language. Sometimes it's difficult to understand if one has a positive experience and thinks this needs to be exported and implemented elsewhere, that others don't take it. Why? This is very, very tricky. And is for us a big challenge also, because we have students from all around the globe in our programs. And if you talk about homosexuality, for example, you have, recently I had a conversation with students in our course, and you have sisters from Africa who say in class, homosexuality is sick. And then you have people from the US or from Western Europe and say, I mean, what are you talking about? And this is in the same church and in the same class, and you see it, and you need to bring them together and so that they can talk to each other. Otherwise, they will remain in their own castles, and they won't understand that there is a different world outside. And this is also why any safeguarding measure, in my perspective, needs to take into account the cultural component. Also in one country that is as diverse as your country is. Go to the Vietnamese Catholic community. Go to the Syro-Malabar Catholic community. Go to the Maronites. Go to the, whatever, Koreans. Go to the Brazilians. Good luck if you want to explain safeguarding as we understand that.
So we are getting close to the quitting time on this portion of the program, but I want to thank everyone who's asked questions and ask if you would please join me in thanking Hans Zollner for being here. And of course, we can't let you go without a little gift. So just a tiny reminder of where you've been. And we know too that you traveled here with your colleague, John McCaffrey. So we've got a little gift for you as well, John. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. As he's indicated, Father Zollner is on Twitter. He's pretty active on Twitter. And right next to the address, the Twitter address, is actually the web address for the institute that he heads. So if you, particularly if you're students and you want to do a little deeper dive into the work of the institute, you can check that out. And there's introductory videos and information about the diploma programs and the licentiate programs as well. And Father Zollner mentioned to some students earlier today that the Institute also sponsors internships in Rome for those who have an interest in deeper study and participation in this work. So again, thank you all for being here. Father Zollner also has made some brochures from the IADC available, so we'll leave some of those on the table for anybody who wants to grab one. Thank you so much for being here. And again, grateful that you're here at Gonzaga. Thank you.